Is a NATO country seriously planning on sending soldiers boots on ground to Ukraine? Just why are they considering it now? And what does the United States think? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so the overall contours of the story that I thought were really interesting are comments from the Estonian prime minister, right? So this isn't like the rumor mill, saying, and she has said that some unspecified countries, presumably NATO states, since those seem to be Ukraine's largest backers, have already sent personnel to train Ukrainian soldiers, quote, on the ground. This is in an interview with the Financial Times. Right? And they've said some countries have assumed the risk of sending personnel to train Ukrainian soldiers in a risk zone during the war, and that NATO states shouldn't fear the risk of escalation from such deployments. Callous statements is, of course, part of a back and forth that Estonian officials have been very publicly making about sending their troops into Ukraine. So I thought this logic was interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that... okay, let's get some additional context. Almost every country on Earth has at least some military members stationed in them from other countries. They're usually embassy staff fulfilling a unique, what in the U.S. we call them defense attachés or foreign area officers, and these are the military's diplomatic corps. These are guys who will interface with the militaries of other countries in order to coordinate, say, a training exercise, right? Let's say the Colombian military says, hey, we are going to purchase these Blackhawks, but we need instructors to help us operate them and teach our guys how to repair them. The U.S. military and its defense attaché will sit there and say, okay, I'm going to be the link that coordinates the U.S., the Department of Defense, and the Colombian Ministry of Defense in order to make this happen. Or if you want to do a joint naval exercise with Thailand, for example, again, a defense attaché is going to fulfill that function. They're also going to provide the DoD some diplomatic insight. Let's say a general says, hey, I'm going to be going to Japan to meet with the Japanese Minister of Defense. Well, that defense attaché is going to say, great, let's take a couple of months. I'm going to put together some documents. I'm going to put together some information so that you, General, know what the defense minister's biggest concerns are, what their controversies they've been dealing with, what are sensitive topics to avoid, right? The things that a good diplomatic corps does. So every country is going to have that. And in somewhere like Ukraine, which is a major focus, is going to have not just one defense attaché, they're going to have a team there. We also know that U.S. military personnel have had a really large and outsized role in helping Ukrainian forces plan and process their intelligence. And while some of this publicly, they say this happens outside of Ukraine itself, I strongly think, based on the number of official visits and things like that, I strongly think there are some attached personnel, again, who are officially probably attached to the embassy, who are fulfilling this kind of liaison work. Again, it's just a physical reality that someone in the U.S. military has to do the coordinating function, especially given that Ukraine receives billions and billions of dollars of U.S. equipment. You can't just drop it on their border in pallets and be like, good luck, guys, figuring out how to work that Patriot. So for context, it is technically true. This is technically true also of China, right? Like NATO troops are in China. Yes, technically correct. They are in their embassies in Beijing, likely liaisoning, coordinating, and gathering information about the Chinese military. And the Chinese troops are in the United States, right? Doing the same function. So again, in that context, right, we should couch some of these statements. But this is not the thing. To say that there's also troops out there who are doing some of these training functions is itself also very, very interesting because it's the most explicit that we've seen. And I believe I have seen no I have no special information. I believe there are some trainers from NATO countries. In fact, I know there are trainers from NATO countries. Are they there on formal military orders? It's not clear, but almost certainly. Because again, if you follow guys like Sivdiv, you know that he spent several months with a volunteer training group who trains Ukrainian soldiers, often conscripts, in basic infantry tactics. They'll teach them operating their weapon system, they'll teach them POWs, they'll teach them using a drone, and they will train them up and have them head to the front lines. And this is good, but what these kind of volunteer organizations can't do is highly technical work. For example, they cannot train a Ukrainian F-16 maintainer, right, to keep the avionics systems running. You can't train them to, load and maintain an ARM Patriot missile batteries, right? The highly technical stuff has to be done by their own countries. In some cases, it's not even legal. So there's almost no doubt that there are trainers there. Russia almost certainly knows this. But Estonia's argument is to say, hey, this is not going to be an escalation. And this is probably true. The reason is because, again, the functions are happening, whether they're 100 feet east of the border, 100 feet west of the border, or 100 feet east of the border, they're happening. And Russia almost certainly knows they're happening as well. In fact, Russia probably believes that it's a given that there are extensive NATO trainers in Ukraine. Because you have to remember, okay, so for Russia, this is just business as usual. Remember, officially, Russia claims that the Luhansk and Donbas and Donetsk People's Republics were independent countries that in 2014 had a spontaneous popular uprising and declared themselves independent of Ukraine. The fact that the members, the military wing that did that, were Russian equipment, had Russian gear, including their top tier at the time armored vehicles. The fact that they had many of the same personnel as Russian airborne troops. Russia, their official stances, it was a popular uprising, and Russia only provided political recognition. Obviously, in the 10 years since that happened, the Russian military basically would rotate through the Donbas region, particularly some of their specialists, like artillery and ISR specialists. And so Russia just takes as a given that when you say you're politically supporting a country in conflict, what you're really doing is having your own military do the fighting. Russia probably believes, in fact, that a lot of those Western volunteers were sent there by NATO countries, sort of like the way Wagner, right, which is not a part of the Russian military or wasn't. Wagner was sent to Ukraine under orders from Putin. So, given this, right, what is Estonia talking about? Estonia, what they're doing is starting to, by publicly saying these things, Estonia is starting to open the discussion among Estonia's allies about what it would look like if Estonia were to have its military perform non-combat roles. And this, I think, is interesting because training is a big one, but so is maintaining, right? Training, maintenance, logistics, anything kind of in the back end of the front line. And that would open up Ukraine to focus its troops on combat roles. And so it would end up being a sort of force multiplier. Now, before we talk about the other countries or the U.S.'s response to this, I want to just recognize that you guys know combatvetnews.com. If you want to see the uncensored combat footage from this past weekend, that video is dropping on Combat Vet News today. It's for members only. You guys know that YouTube routinely demonetizes my content. I have very few sponsors. I think in the last month I've had like 0 sponsors. And so I depend on you guys to support me and the team, right? To keep us doing this every month. And any one of these tiers will get you access to the twice weekly uncensored combat footage. But if you want to really support the channel and pick it up at the lieutenant tier or the colonel tier, you get the shout outs at the end of the video and the exclusive room on the Discord. So again, a huge thank you to all you guys that support us, and check us out over there because the new video is dropping today. Now, for the United States' part, they've actually ruled out sending military instructors to Ukraine. Officially, right? They said the U.S. has currently no plans to send instructors to Ukraine, right? Brown acknowledged that while the U.S. military instructors may have been in Ukraine before the full-scale Russian invasion, that is not the case now. And I suspect we'll have the opportunity to do that after the war is over, but currently the U.S. has no plans to return military instructors to Ukraine. This is true. Actually, I went to my captain's career course with a few reserve officers who were training Ukrainian military police. And I believe we're training them primarily in Lviv. So this is a pretty decisive statement. Sometimes you get stuff that's couched. Oftentimes you'll sit there. So sometimes what you'll do is politicians or generals will give kind of non-answers. And this is what I thought was interesting. He's like, U.S. military instructors were Ukraine before the invasion. He says that is not the case now. So it says, hey, there's not really there's not any, these instructors aren't there now. So that's a pretty explicit denial, because sometimes they'll say things like, well, we don't have plans to send any instructors, which is what he says here. But that can imply that you don't have plans to send instructors, to send Ukraine additional instructors, right? Which would imply the existence of instructors at baseline. Does that make sense? Again, they may sit there, or it may be something where they're not instructors, they're technical advisors. Sometimes the U.S. military can do stuff like that. We don't have instructors. Instructors are their own thing. But technical advisors, we absolutely have, right? So I'm actually put some credibility in the statement. I think what he says is what he means. I don't think there's some hidden carve out again, but I think it's possible that Ukrainian forces, right? We know that they leave Ukraine for training. They train outside of Ukraine. A lot of brigades, whole brigades were trained in Poland. So I don't think that has necessarily let up. So it may be a case of like, hey, the U.S. is like, listen, there's no reason for us to have substantive numbers of instructors there. Maybe we do all our training on the other side of the Polish border. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to the Colonel tier members. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier members. I really could not do this without you guys. And be sure to check out the video dropping later today. Cheers.